I'm not sure if they'd ever admit openly that mistakes were made, but I think internally they've made very clear in leaks to the media that they were not happy with what happened with Mike Waltz involving the editor-in-chief of the Atlantic magazine in that group chat. But more than that, I think the issue at hand here is not as much with the signal issues, because if you actually look at what happened in that group, Pete Hegseth has shared details that he did not need to share. And he also has since engaged in a number of controversial activities, including firing a number of his own staff. And yet somehow his job apparently seems more secure than Mike Waltz's, because ultimately the issue with Mike Waltz more than anything else is that he was not seen as sufficiently MAGA enough. Unlike Pete Hegseth, Mike Waltz was seen as a conventional Republican who, when after January 6, 2021, in the days immediately following the insurrection, he denounced people who had raided the Capitol. He went out of his way to work with the Biden administration in the early days of their administration. He was not seen as someone that was sufficiently independent. Let's not forget that he was a well-known conventional Republican who had worked in the vice president's office of Dick Cheney and really was fully supportive of the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. So ultimately, I think it was, yes, some signal gate, but a lot of it was based on ideology and not being fully aligned with the president's MAGA agenda.
So his new role as ambassador to the UN, can you firstly take us through what that will mean essentially? And it also still needs to be confirmed by the Senate. Is that likely, do you think?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think right now we're seeing Democrats come out denouncing Mike Waltz, saying that he deserved this, and also saying that Pete Hegseth should be next. I think it's hard to know where Democrats are going to go on this, but ultimately the issue is Republicans. You need just 50 senators in the Senate to go for this, and they have more than that. And I don't think the Republicans would be wanting to buck President Trump on a less controversial choice for UN representative. Ultimately, but as Mike Waltz eventually likely becomes the representative to the United Nations, I think there's a really important role, because ultimately it doesn't actually have all that much power, but it does have a lot of media coverage. Let's not forget Nikki Haley leveraged her role in the first Trump administration as the UN representative to launch a presidential campaign. Beforehand, she had only been a governor of South Carolina. In the UN, I think rhetorically, Mike Waltz will be able to, in many ways, be a more forceful and more public face of the Trump administration and furthering the Trump administration's strategic agenda. But it really comes with a lot of media attention, but not necessarily as much liability. At the end of the day, what a UN representative does is vote and work with different countries around the world, but he doesn't need to have a major budget. He doesn't need to corral different colleagues in different areas in the way that he did as National Security Advisor. I think he will find far less opposition and ideological challenges as a UN representative versus what he did as National Security Advisor.
And finally, just briefly, Jared, you mentioned there Pete Hegseth also being involved in Signalgate. There's also been reports of a second group chat. Do you think that could he be next in this sort of sense?
Yeah, so what's interesting about that the Atlantic, which recently published an interview with Donald Trump, in which three members of the Atlantic editorial team, including Jeffrey Goldberg, went to the White House to meet with Donald Trump. What I found interesting in that interview was the fact that Donald Trump admitted to talking to Pete Hegseth and that Pete Hegseth had made some mistakes. In addition to sharing far more information in that Signal chat than one could have ever imagined a Secretary of Defense sharing, Pete Hegseth has also fired Chief of Staff, Deputy Chief of Staff, Senior Advisor, even a Deputy Chief of Staff advisor as well. It's hard to keep track of all the people fleeing the Secretary of Defense's office. And ultimately, these are not what they would call deep state people. These are people that Pete Hegseth had brought himself. And so there's a lot of controversy around Pete Hegseth, but he ultimately is seen as far more loyal and more ideologically aligned with President Trump than Mike Waltz and others in the administration.
All right, Jared Mondschien from the United States Studies Center there. Thanks so much for your time and insights this afternoon.
Thank you.